Hey guys, Navinat on No Limit Hold'em, and today we're going to talk about the winning mindset. We're going to talk about what it actually means to win. We have already talked about a lot of these concepts, and I'm just going to kind of skim over some of the stuff we've been talking about recently as a very, very quick refresher. But mainly we want to talk about what it really means to beat a player at No Limit Hold'em. What does ownership, like true ownership, really look like? Yes, we want to avoid mistakes, we want to induce mistakes. We've talked about mistakes in terms of the fundamental theorem of poker and how we can like take a set mine here even though we're taking a small bit of EV and shipping it into our opponent's hypothetical virtual stack or his virtual EV bank account, hoping to harvest bigger mistakes on later streets, and enough of the time to win that little battle on balance. We've talked about how sat mining and things like that could be looked at as sort of a microcosm for GTO play, where in GTO terms we're going to want to trade small GTO mistakes by using exploitative approaches in the hopes that it will harvest or create more mistake opportunities for our opponents. And that's what it's all about. It's all about being balanced when there's not a good reason to not be balanced, in order to avoid mistakes yourself and make it hard for you to be exploited, while at the same time looking for leaks in your opponent's game, in his frequencies, in his just thought process, and the hands that he chooses to take X, Y, or Z line with, and how we can exploit players while hopefully keeping our eyes open for counter exploits, and that it's all about winning the min-max game, which means that we want to cut our losses, lose the minimum when we're going to lose, and win the maximum when we're going to win, and how in a way it all kind of just boils down to what they call the principle of reciprocality, although I don't think that's a word, so I'm going to call it the principle of reciprocity. Yes, it's their principle, but it's my video. So the idea is, in a zero-sum game or any situation, all else considered even or equal, the person who is willing and or able to do that which their opponents or opposition is not or are not willing and or able to do, that is an edge. So if I can do everything the same as my opponent but play slightly better ranges pre-flop, maybe I can make some better folds post-flop, maybe everything's even except I can value bet just a little bit thinner, maybe we both play an identical strategy with our A game, but I can stay in my A game longer. Maybe our A games and B games are the same, but I never go on tilt and he goes on tilt, and my player pool tends to go on tilt a lot of the time, but I skip my turn to punt off buy-ins, then that's my edge. And that's really fundamentally, if we really get down to the nitty-gritty, that's kind of what it all breaks down to. Like right now you're watching a video on poker strategy, and if the players that you're going to play against later on in this week are not, then that's your edge. That's how you're going to win money. But none of that really tells us exactly what ownership is. What does it really mean to beat a player at poker in this hand? And that's going to be mainly the topic of this video. It requires a different mindset than what bad players and like mediocre players are probably used to having. It runs a little bit counterintuitive. I guess intuition is that winning pots is great. Like that's what it's all about. We want to get in there and win pots. I mean, we certainly didn't come here to lose pots, right? But it's not really about winning pots, because the player who wins the largest number of pots is not, I was going to say not necessarily, but I would say probably not even likely to win the most money in the long run. It's not about winning pots, and if you ever think that it is, then just play every single hand you get dealt and play it aggressively. Maximize your showdown value, maximize your, well, the times you win a showdown, and maximize your fold equity, so the times you win before showdown, and you'll win just about every pot you can win. and you'll lose a lot of money in the process. And if we understand that, and I think most people that are watching this video will understand that, it's pretty hard to argue, and it makes a lot of sense, right? So if we know that, and if we know that winning pots is not really the object of the game, then why would it be the case that we feel like we ought to win this pot? If we know it's not about winning pots, and I think we can agree that it's not, then why is it that we want to win the pot that we're playing right now? It's because our emotional incentives are not in line with our logical incentives. And that's bad news in a way, because we're going to have to get our emotions in check. Going back to the, whatever you want to call it, reciprocity or the principle of reciprocality, if I'm able to get my mind in check and I'm able to do the things that my emotions don't want to do, when I know that they're actually better, strategically speaking, then that is my edge. If we're both pretty curious and we just want to see the hand, then if I'm able to keep myself in check and not give way to the curiosity, and you're not, then you're not going to win in those spots. So that is a good thing in a way, especially now that you've heard this and you know that it's something to work on. Look, I mean, I think that if it weren't for all of the emotions in poker, if it weren't for people having egos that are not in check and having curiosity that is not in check and having different types of tilt that they go on, I think that if it weren't for that, poker would be very, very hard to beat indeed. It's just like when you're playing fast fold poker. That's not easy these days because people are just simply not incentivized to play as badly because their emotions of impatience or just being action junkies aren't fighting against them so often or so hard. And I think also if the game were designed, if we were playing online and every time a hand went to showdown, even if a hand didn't go to showdown, the player that won the pot was required to show their hand, I think that would be so bad for winning players because one of the mini games that we're trying to win within the game of poker is the game of trying to be disciplined, trying to beat our emotions when we know that the emotions are at odds with our winning. So yeah, curiosity is a strong emotion sometimes. Sometimes you really, really want to know. And if the guy's not going to show you and he's going to put his hands into the muck and you think he might be bluffing, that curiosity is worth some amount of money to you. And you might be willing to pay that amount of money just to ease your curiosity. And if that's you, good. I want you in my game. So let's not be the kind of player that people want in their games. If curiosity has got you, then work on it. Or play poker with the expectation that you're not going to win as much money as you could. Because that curiosity, or if you're fighting the urge of boredom and you can't stand it, you didn't come in there to just throw hand after hand into the muck, then that's okay, cool. You know, if you enjoy the game and you don't care about winning, not only do I think you should play, I think you should play at my table. But if you want to win, there's a price to pay for all of those emotions. And you just kind of have to decide, you know, what's more important to you. If you're still watching this video, I think that we know it's more important to you to make money. So we've already established it's not about winning pots. And if it's not about winning pots, then what is it about? It's about winning more money in the pots you do win and losing less money in the pots that you do lose. It's about taking the best lines with the best ranges to produce the highest amount of EV. It's about avoiding mistakes and inducing or allowing mistakes to take place. And there is a simple truth, a kind of root concept, a mindset adjustment, a paradigm shift. We want to get rid of the old mindset and we want to adopt a better, more winning mindset. And it is possible, guys. I'm going to tell you that it is very possible. I've done it. You can get your emotions to align with the reality of the game and the strategy once you first of all know it. Second, you really know it. Third, you really, really know it. And you have not only the logical knowledge, but you've seen it and you've applied it and you know it. There is a difference between knowing it and knowing it. Like, we know that the sun is a star, but when we look at it, do we see a star or do we see the sun? You know what I mean? Like, we have to know it, we have to live in it, we have to swim around in this paradigm. The old mindset that winning pots is the object of the game, you've got to get rid of that. That's got to go. Thinking that, well, I want to raise to win pots, and then sometimes I'll call for pot odds. No. We are not in this, like, 2006 game where we figured out that the best players don't just play their cards, they play their opponents and all of that. You know, not that that's nothing, but it's not the end all. We're not just playing some game of chicken in which we will use our hand as a backup plan if it comes down. No, really, if we're playing efficiently, we want to make the best use of the cards that we have in our hands that we possibly can. That is a misnomer. It's a bad mindset. A better mindset is to be efficient. We want to maximize our efficiency. We want to realize that the money that we win and the money that we don't lose are the same thing. There is no difference. I like the Mike Caro story where he says, if a genie comes to you at the end of the year and says, hey, you've broken about even this year at poker, so I'm going to give you $5,000. Would you prefer that I went back in time and shaved $5,000 off of all of the losses where you lost pots? Or would you prefer that I added $5,000 of value to the hands that you won, making those pots bigger? The correct answer is, well, who gives a shit, right? That's the correct answer. It doesn't matter because those two things are the same thing. We can talk about chip utility and sometimes opportunity cost, and we can talk about volatility and all of that stuff. But in general, the money that you win and the money that you don't lose are not kind of the same. They're not similar. They are identical. They are exactly the same thing. And the new paradigm should be I raise to create plus EV situations, and I use my ranges as efficiently as possible. I try to avoid ownership happening to me, and I look to own other players, and that's what we want to talk about. What is ownership? Ownership could be thought of as breaking the state of fair play. Okay, so the state of fair play is we're going to win some, we're going to lose some, we're going to all be dealt the same number of good, bad, and indifferent hands. We're going to get coolered sometimes. Sometimes we're going to be on the business end. Sometimes we're going to be on the good end of a cooler. Sometimes we cold deck somebody else. Sometimes they cold deck us. Sometimes they bluff and we fold better hands to their bluffs. Sometimes our bluffs get through. Sometimes theirs do. And I stack some players, and sometimes I get stacked, and it's all just what? Gambling? Is that what we're doing? No. No, not us. We don't want to gamble. We don't want to play fair. Playing fair is for, I don't know, like flipping quarters or something. In poker, we can use our skill to break the state of fair play. And breaking fair play, if we're trying to do that, we're accomplishing it, like we could say that our opponents are either going to have to fold versus my bluffs, or they're going to have to call some of my value bets, right? And when these coolers come up, if we're doing the right things, then we can make sure that our opponent is going to be on the bad end of these coolers more often than we are. And we are going to be able to stack our opponents, but they're not going to stack us, not unless they earn that right. Your opponents should not be able to stack you if they're not bluffing often enough. And that's a big, stop and think about that. If you're playing against a calling station or a weak type player, he has not earned the right to stack you. He should not be able to take set mines against you. You should laugh at his set mine. If a weak type player tries to call your raises with a small pocket pair out of position, there's no way that should turn a profit against you. Because if he's not bluffing enough, then he doesn't get to stack you. And you should feel very bad if you allow somebody who doesn't bluff raise to stack you. Unless it's one of those just real big coolers where, like once in a while, of course, we're going to have like a set against 2 overcards and a nut flush draw, and we're going to get all the money in and we're going to get stacked. But you know what I mean, or I hope you do. So we have to what? This is just the state of fair play. In the state of fair play, we have to bet some flops, but not all flops. And why is that? It's because our opponent is going to call some flops, but he won't call all flops. And stay with me on this. I think this is going to give you an opportunity for a true light bulb moment. We have to bluff some of the turns after we bet some of the flops. So we have to double barrel some of the time, even with bluffs. Why? Why do we have to do that? We have to do that because our opponent is going to call on the flop some of the time and then fold on the turn. But sometimes he's going to call on the turn. That's why we have to double barrel bluff some turns, but not all turns. And we have to run the triple barrel. Sometimes we have to triple barrel bluff. Why? Because sometimes our opponent is going to call on the flop and fold on the turn. Sometimes he's going to call on the flop and call on the turn and then fold on the river. And sometimes he's not going to. So that means that we have to exactly bluff some of the time. As long as that is true, but not if it's not true. That's where ownership comes in. That's how we own. The opposite story, like why do I sometimes call the flop and give up on the turn? Listen to this, guys. Seriously, this is super important. Why do I sometimes call flops even if I know I'm going to have to give up on turns? I do that because my opponent is going to bluff flop some of the time, but then shut down on turns and play honestly. Well, what if he doesn't? Then you don't have to call flops to give up on turns. You see what I mean? Okay, I'm going to come back to it. So why do I call flop, call turn, only to fold to the river? Because sometimes villain is going to bluff the flop, bluff the turn, and he's going to shut down on the river. That's why you have to have a range of hands that will call the flop, call the turn, and fold if he bets again on the river. And why is it that sometimes against good players, in the state of fair play, if they're able to put us in the state of fair play, why do I sometimes have to call down with my bluff catchers? Like sometimes I have to take like the top 50% if my opponent's, depending on bet sizing, maybe, well, and the run out and range advantage and that sort of thing. But there are going to be times where I'm going to need to call down all the way down, even though I only beat my opponent's bluffs. If he's going to barrel off with some of his bluffs. And if he is going to bet some of the time with his bluffs on the flop, but he's going to give up with some of those bluffs and continue bluffing some turns, but he's going to give up with some of those turn bluffs and continue bluffing some rivers, then I have to call him on some flops and fold some flops. I have to call him on the flop and fold some turns. I have to call him on the flop and the turn and fold some rivers, and I have to call flop, call turn, call river some of the time, even when I'm only able to bluff catch or beat a bluff. But what if he doesn't do any of that? What if my opponent doesn't bluff often enough on the flop? Well, then we don't have to bluff catch the flop. Does that mean that we don't have to bluff catch as often? No, it means we don't have to bluff catch the flop. So what if my opponent doesn't double barrel often enough? Well, then we can float flops and then just give up. We can fold turns, but we can expect that if he gives up and checks the turn, free lunch. We can peel flops more liberally, knowing we can get our showdown value to showdown more often, and we can float flops hoping to or planning on stealing on later streets once our opponent checks the flop or checks the turn, because we know that he's not double barreling often enough. This would also mean if he's not double barreling often enough, then when we do peel the flop with our showdown value, we don't have to bluff catch the turn. When he does fire another shell, we can just let it go, and that is us folding in a spot maybe that we shouldn't be able to float in, or fold in rather. So if we're able to fold a hand we ought not be able to fold, that's us winning. We are winning. Even though he's dragging the pot, we beat him. We beat him. He didn't beat us, we beat him. And what if he never triple barrels as a bluff? Well, then don't bluff catch the river, right? You know? And if he doesn't bluff bluff enough on the flop, and he doesn't bluff enough on the turn, and he doesn't barrel off as a bluff on rivers, then you probably shouldn't be getting to the river with too many bluff catchers anyway. I mean, some of your hands will become bluff catchers, I guess, by that point. But, yeah, what if he doesn't give up any bluffs on the turn? So that means we're playing against a player that is, once he bets the flop, he's always betting the turn. Well, then don't call the flop and fold the turn, right? Like, don't call the flop with hands that are planning on calling flop, folding turn. Well, does that mean that we should call flop and then call turn also in spots where we would otherwise fold on the turn? Or does that mean that we should just get out of the way on the flop instead of calling on the flop and then folding on the turn? Yes. It means both of those things. Either one of those things is going to be an exploit, and we need to know the specific board texture on our exact hands to know what's going to be better in a given spot. But either one of those things. Your opponent, if he's going to be like betting flop and betting turn, but then playing honest on rivers, then we can call on the flop and call on the turn lighter, knowing that he's not going to bluff us off of our showdown value on the river. Or if we've got a weaker hand that we expect to call on the flop, but we're really going to feel like we're going to probably have to fold most turns, and we know that he's going to bet flop and bet turn, then we can just fold. We can just fold on the flop, just get out of the way and let him do his thing, and we're not there. So that means that he's not making enough money, because all of the money he's supposed to make when we call him on the flop and fold the turn is gone. He doesn't get that money, but we're going to get it from him, right? So what if he doesn't have enough value hands? What if he's over bluffing significantly? Well, then we can call with, what, a slightly higher percent of our bluff catchers? No, like if we get to a river spot, for instance, and our opponent bets pot-sized, so he really ought to, if he's giving us 2-1, then the kind of game theoretical, if we're in a purely, let's just simplify it, say we're in a polar versus bluff catcher spot where there's one pot-sized bet behind. and in this polar versus bluff catcher spot, our opponent is going to move in with all of the hands that he gets here with. So he's going to be over bluffing. Then if we have a hand that can beat all of his bluffs, even if it loses to all of his value hands, then we have a bluff catcher, right? If our opponent bluffs a little more often than he ought to in this situation, we should not call a little more often with our bluff catchers. We should call with all of our bluff catchers. That's the beauty of this game. That's why it is so much simpler when you really start learning it than you might have thought otherwise. And if you're not sure about why this is the case, go back and watch my video on the indifference principle and minimum defense frequencies. Because the idea is this: if our opponent is bluffing the right amount, he's making us indifferent between calling or folding with our bluff catchers. And if he's betting a pot-sized bet in order to win the size of the pot, then we need to be calling with 50% of our bluff catchers to make sure he's indifferent between bluffing or not bluffing. So once he bets, if he doesn't do it in a balanced way, we are not indifferent, by definition, because that's what betting in a balanced way means. It means that it's going to make us indifferent, like it doesn't matter. So if he's effectively polarized his range against our capped range, and we don't have enough hands that would have wanted to slow play in any given spot, so we don't have traps, we just have bluff catchers, and he can bet a pot-sized bet with 2 value hands for every 1 bluff in his range, then that betting range has effectively captured the entire value of the pot, because we're indifferent. It doesn't matter. We may as well fold, because when we call, we're going to lose 2 out of 3 times, but when we win, we're going to win twice as much as we're losing or risking. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we call, it doesn't matter if we fold, if he's doing it with the right ratios. But if he's not balanced, if he is at all over bluffing, then that means that all of our bluff catchers will make money in the long run. So we should call with all of them. So he can be off by 5%, and that means we should adjust our strategy across the board. We should make a binary adjustment. He's over bluffing by 5%. We should be calling with 100% instead of 50% of our range. And the exact opposite is also the case. If your opponent doesn't bluff often enough, then we should be folding not more of our bluff catchers. We should be folding all of our bluff catchers, because if there aren't enough bluffs in his range, then we are not indifferent. We can make a unilateral adjustment and just fold all of our bluff catchers, because we're not indifferent to bluff catching. We're not indifferent. We're actually losing money bluff catching. With which bluff catchers? All of them. So which ones should we call with? None of them. So I hope that makes sense, because that's the key to ownership, right? Basically, it comes down to this. Anytime I can correctly fold against my opponent in a spot where I should not be able to, that is me owning him. That's what it means to win. That's how you've got to change your mindset. And it just happens to be true and logical. It's not emotional. But once you realize it's true and logical, it will become emotional. You'll learn for this to make you feel happy. Anytime I make a bet against my opponent that he should be able to fold, but he can't find the fold button, ownership. That's what it means. Anytime I get out of villain's way earlier on in a hand that should have to call one or two streets and fold later, I have owned him. I haven't put that money in on the flop just to set it on fire later on. Now, he should be playing better than that. He should be putting me in a spot where I have to call some flops and fold some turns. And I have to call some turns and fold some rivers. And I have to call some rivers and fold some rivers. So, if he's not doing that, though, then he does not have the right to stack me. He has not earned the right to stack me. Don't get stacked by a guy who never bluffs. Okay? Don't do that. This is Navinad theorem. If villain has to either fold to too many bluffs or call too many value bets, I gain money. If I don't have to make bad folds or bad calls against my opponent, then I gain money. This is like the fundamental theorem of poker, but this is Nav theorem right here. Your opponents must earn the right to value bet you by bluffing appropriately. That's how they create incentive for you to call their value bets. If they are not bluffing, stop calling their value bets. And villain has to earn the right to bluff you by value betting often enough. And if he's not value betting often enough compared to how often he's bluffing, then stop folding your bluff catchers, right? Okay, so just a quick couple examples and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, so I am at a 1-2 game or a 2-5 game or a 1-3 game at the local casino. And I open ace-queen from early position, full ring, and a tight and passive player 3-bets me. And I am able to correctly fold ace-queen to a 3-bet against just one player's 3-bet. That is utter frickin' ownership. There's no way I should be able to fold a hand that's so high in my range as ace-queen. So this should not make me sad. You should not be upset. You should not raise ace-queen offsuit. The nittiest player at the table 3-bets it, and then you're like, damn, man, this sucks. Now I gotta fold ace-queen. That's crazy. That is crazy. That's illogical. You're being a crazy person. Don't be a crazy person. That's the other part of the Navinad theorem. Don't be a crazy person. It's awesome that you can fold ace-queen against a nit. It's awesome that you can fold ace-queen against a player who never 3-bets, right? That's him doing something bad. That's not anything you're doing bad. You're winning money here. This is that same thing. The money that we don't lose is exactly the same as the money that we do win. It's the same thing. And if you can realize that it is true, once that comes together for you, you'll start actually being emotional in the right way. And man, if you can get your emotions working for you instead of against you in poker, then it really will be an easy freaking game. Because we're always just battling our emotions. And the person who has the most discipline usually wins, right? So if I open the button, the big blind calls, and then we go to the flop, and it's not a particularly good flop for villain. Maybe it's not a good flop at all. Maybe it's something like ace 10 5 rainbow, and I don't have it, and the big blind just donk leads into us, And we know how this guy plays, and we know how the player pool is, and we know most of the time when players are donking into you, they're doing it with not the best hand, but they're not doing it with air. They have some kind of a draw, or they have some kind of a weak pair, like top pair with a very bad kicker, second pair with a whatever kicker, or bottom pair with like a good kicker. When your opponent bets into you and you just have nothing in this spot, you shouldn't be mad that he cut in line, or cut in front of you, or whatever, stole your thunder. You should say, thank you, fish. I was gonna waste money bluffing you. So I appreciate you not taking the only line you could have taken to make money with your bluff catcher, and checking, and actually telling me that you have a hand so that I don't have to call you. I appreciate it. You know, that's the way you should think. And really, like, if you know it's true, then eventually your heart's gonna like figure it out, and your emotions will line up with reality. One more. I bet Ace King on Ace King 5, or I'm sorry, on Ace 5-4 Rainbow. Get called, turn is a 9. I bet, get raised, and am able to make a correct fold in a spot where I've got top pair, top kicker, and should never be able to fold. But we can fold in that spot against almost all the players at 2-5 or less, and most players online and micro stakes and small stakes, because players are so imbalanced when it comes to raising turns or rivers. So I guess there is one more. We check our hand all the way down. Okay, this is one of my favorites. So I'm in a heads up pot, and I either called or I raised pre-flop, doesn't matter. But the action goes check, 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 check. And our opponent turns over the busted draw, and we have bottom pair. Or like ace high, something that we had no business getting to showdown with. But our opponent doesn't do the right things. They don't construct their ranges right. They don't take the correct lines. They don't use the right parts of the range to do the aggression with. And so they have allowed us to get our showdown value to showdown. And when we have the straight draw and they've got bottom pair, they don't get to realize that showdown value. Okay, so what it comes down to is, if I can stack you, but you can't stack me, good luck beating me at poker. When players set mine against you and you know this little bit of information, you know they don't bluff often enough on turns or rivers, that should make you smile inside. Like, you're going to take a set mine, especially in a live cash game where the raises are so big and you're opening to like $20 or $25 with ace king or aces or something like that, and your opponent's calling you with sixes. Like, it's so cute. It's cute because they've got to be able to stack you some of the time, or they're just not going to make money with those set mines. But if they never bluff, then how in the hell are they going to stack you? Stop losing your mind, and they won't. If your opponent doesn't fold versus your bluffs, they're going to make mistakes against your value hands. They cannot have it both ways. And if they fold versus your value hands, then they're going to lose money to your bluffs. And if that's not the case, then either your opponents are cheating, or they're psychic, or you're not doing something right. You're not. There's no way that your opponents can both fold when you want them to call and call when you want them to fold. Maybe you're a tell box. Maybe that's it. But usually it's just not the case. And if I can get out of your way when you have it, or make a lot of money when you don't, then I win, right? It's this reciprocality. It's the mistakes. It's all of that. But thanks for watching, guys. I think that went a little bit on the long side. Definitely longer than I anticipated. Until next time, well, check me out. Go to dondalst@gmail.com. Send me a message. Leave me a comment. I'd love to invite you into the strategy group. We can chit-chat or chat-chit, whichever your preference is. Maybe do a free session, see how it goes, that kind of thing. Until next time, guys. Good L-U-C-K. Luck. Good luck with the little quote things and the exclamation, but you get the idea. Good that.